You want to transform your house into the White House? Because your HOA doesn't like your paint job? Exactly, I said, nodding enthusiastically. Think presidential, think under historical, think the most epic HOA defiance in the history of suburban America. Bob stared at me for a moment. Then a slow grin spread across his face. You're serious, aren't you? Dead serious, I said. I have a situation with my HOA president, and this is my response. Mr. Miller, Bob said, shaking his head and chuckling, you are one patriotic individual. I'm in. This is going to be the most interesting project I've ever worked on. Plus, I've always wanted to build a replica of the White House. He paused. But are you sure about this? It's a bit much. Much is exactly what I'm going for, I said. I want it to be unforgettable. I want it to be unmistakable. I want it to be the most glorious, ridiculous, HOA-defying White House replica the world has ever seen. And I have to say, I can't afford this. Finally, I breathed, stepping back to admire my handiwork. My house, once a drab, forgettable box in the monotonous landscape of Harmony Heights, now sang. It wasn't just a paint job, it was a statement. A vibrant, swirling mural of blues and greens depicting an abstract ocean scene flowed across the front facade. Accents of fiery orange and sunny yellow peeked out from around the windows and doors, like playful bursts of sunlight. It was bold. It was unique. It was exactly what I, Arthur, wanted. And then he arrived. He stood there on my freshly painted and HOA unapproved driveway, his face a mask of horrified disapproval. He was the HOA representative, a human embodiment of beige, clutching a clipboard like a shield against the vibrant assault on his senses. I, Arthur Morgan, am not your typical suburban homeowner. I'm an artist, at heart, if not always by profession. I believe that life is too short for beige walls, for cookie-cutter houses, for conformity. My house, I decided, would be my canvas, a reflection of my personality, my creativity, my, perhaps, slightly eccentric taste. Harmony Heights was a nice enough, quiet enough place, but it lacked color. Mr. Miller? He asked, his voice tight with barely suppressed disgust. That's me, I said, beaming with pride. What do you think? Quite the transformation, isn't it? Mr. Bland, he introduced himself, from the Harmony Heights Homeowners Association. We've received complaints, numerous complaints, regarding your house. My house? I repeated, feigning innocence. What about it? Mr. Bland gestured towards the vibrant mural with a trembling hand. This color scheme, he sputtered, is in direct violation of the community guidelines. It's disruptive. It's unharmonious. It clashes with the neighborhood aesthetic. He proceeded to pull out a small booklet. Clashes? I asked, raising an eyebrow. With what? The endless sea of beige and greige? I thought I was providing a public service, adding a little interest to the landscape. The HOA, Mr. Bland continued, ignoring my comment, has a strictly enforced color palette, Mr. Miller, for the exterior of all homes here. He thrust the booklet at me. It was titled, Approved Exterior Color Options for Harmony Heights. I flipped through it. It was page after page of beige. Different shades of beige, mind you. Eggshell, antique white, misty gray, subtle sandstone. It was a symphony of blandness. You're telling me, I said, my voice laced with sarcasm, that these are my only options? I have to paint my house beige? Those are the approved colors, Mr. Miller, Mr. Bland said, his voice devoid of any warmth, for the sake of community harmony, property values, aesthetic consistency. Aesthetic consistency? I repeated, gesturing towards my house. I think I'm being artistically consistent. I'm expressing myself. I'm adding value. Mr. Bland just stared at me, his expression unchanging. He clearly didn't appreciate my artistic vision. He handed me an official violation notice, informed me that I had 30 days to remedy the situation, i.e., repaint my house in a soul-crushingly boring color, and retreated, looking like he needed a stiff drink and a long lie-down in a very, very beige room. The HOA meeting, held in the Harmony Heights Community Center, a building that, ironically, was painted a particularly offensive shade of beige, was, as expected, a showdown. The board members sat at a long table, looking like a collection of mannequins dressed in neutral tones. And then there was Brenda Beige, the president of the Harmony Heights HOA and the undisputed queen of all things bland. She was a woman who clearly believed that color was a dangerous substance, to be used sparingly, if at all. Everything about her was beige or neutral. Her clothes, her hair, her makeup, even her expression. She radiated an aura of control, a deep-seated fear of anything different, and a profound commitment to maintaining the utterly soul-crushing uniformity of Harmony Heights. "Mr. Miller," Brenda began, her voice as crisp and colorless as her linen suit, "your house has been brought to our attention." She said house as if it were a particularly unpleasant disease. "My house, Miss Beige," I corrected, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable, "is my home, and I've simply chosen to express my individuality through a unique paint job." "Individuality?" Brenda scoffed. "Mr. Miller, this is Harmony Heights. We value harmony. We value conformity. We value beige. But there's nothing in the bylaws that specifically prohibits my chosen colors," I pointed out, trying a different tactic. "There are guidelines, yes, but they're open to interpretation, and I believe my house enhances the neighborhood's aesthetic." "Enhances," Brenda repeated, her voice rising in pitch. "It disrupts, it clashes, it's hurting my eyes." "It's causing psychological distress to some of our residents," a member added. "Psychological distress?" I asked, incredulous. "From paint? Are you serious?" "It's lowering property values, Mr. Miller," Brenda declared. "It's setting a bad example. It's unneighborly." "It's art, Brenda," I said, my patience wearing thin. "It's a form of self-expression. It's color. Something this neighborhood could desperately use a little more of." The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few of them, I noticed, were actually avoiding looking at the photographs of my house that Brenda had helpfully projected onto a screen. Perhaps they were secretly afraid of being infected by the color. But Brenda, she was unmoved. She was a woman on a mission to eradicate all traces of vibrancy and individuality from Harmony Heights. "The house," she declared, slamming her gavel down with unnecessary force, "must be repainted in an approved color. You have 2 weeks, Mr. Miller, and you are hereby fined $500 for violating the aesthetic harmony of Harmony Heights." Aesthetic harmony? It was a paint job. I walked out of that meeting, my blood boiling, my sense of injustice reaching critical levels. Brenda Beige had declared war on my house. And I, Arthur Miller, was not about to surrender. It was time to fight back. But not with paint. With architecture. 2 weeks. That's all the time Brenda Beige, in her infinite, beige-obsessed wisdom, had given me to repaint my house, to obliterate my beautiful, vibrant mural, to erase my artistic statement, to transform my home back into another bland, cookie-cutter box in the monotonous landscape of Harmony Heights. 2 weeks to surrender to the forces of HOA enforced conformity. 2 weeks to absolutely, positively not comply. I, Arthur Miller, was not a repainter of houses. I was an artist, at least in my own mind, a rebel, a champion of color and individuality. And I was not about to let Brenda and her band of beige-loving bureaucrats dictate the aesthetic of my own home. It wasn't just about the paint job anymore. It was about principle. It was about freedom of expression. It was about the right to have a house that didn't look like every other house on the street. My internal monologue was a delightful mix of outrage, determination, and a growing sense of mischievous glee. "They want me to repaint?" I muttered to myself, pacing my living room, which, thankfully, was still painted in vibrant, HOA unapproved colors. Fine, let them try to make me, but they're going to have to deal with the consequences. I needed a plan, and fast. My first action was one of defiance. I would not repaint. I would make that perfectly clear. I looked up to see if there were any rules against signs. There weren't. I decided to create a large sign that said, "My house, my choice." I placed it at the front of my yard. Of course, the HOA did not take kindly to this, and they threatened to take legal action. I needed a better plan, a strategy, a way to fight back, to defend my artistic vision, to make Brenda Beige's head explode. And as I stared at my brightly colored house, a sudden, brilliant, utterly absurd idea struck me. If my house had to be different, it would be spectacularly different. It would be iconic. It would be presidential. My weapon of choice, naturally, was research. I delved into the Harmony Heights HOA bylaws, local zoning regulations, and, most importantly, historical building designs. I was looking for a loophole, a precedent, a way to transform my house without technically violating any rules. I was also, I admit, looking for inspiration. Something bold, something unexpected, something that would make a statement. I'm an architect, so my mind works best when looking at designs. And then I found it. It wasn't in the bylaws, not exactly. It was more of an absence of rules. There were regulations about paint colors, landscaping, and exterior modifications, of course, but there was nothing, not a single word, that restricted the architectural style of homes in Harmony Heights. As long as a building met basic structural and safety codes, it could, theoretically, look like anything. And that's when it hit me. The inspiration. The perfect, audacious, utterly ridiculous solution. The most iconic building in America. The White House. The White House, the symbol of American democracy, the residence of the president, the architectural antithesis of everything Brenda Beige stood for. It was perfect. It was insane. It was exactly what I was going to do. My plan, Operation Oval Office, was as simple as it was audacious. I wouldn't just repaint my house, I'd transform it. I'd turn my ordinary suburban home into a scaled-down, historically accurate, as much as possible anyway, replica of the White House. It would be a massive undertaking, a complete architectural overhaul. I'd add columns, porticos, and other iconic details. I'd use high-quality materials, white, of course, I wasn't completely insane. I'd recreate the famous facade, but on a smaller, more suburban scale. I might even add a miniature rose garden and a slightly tongue-in-cheek Oval Office, probably in my garage. And I'd argue, with a perfectly straight face, that I was simply renovating my house, not violating any specific rules. I wasn't repainting it, well, not technically, I was remodeling it. And there were no rules against remodeling, as long as I obtained the necessary building permits, which I was confident I could get. I could already picture Brenda's reaction, the sputtering outrage, the vein throbbing in her forehead, the inevitable meltdown. It was a beautiful image. I knew it was ridiculous. I knew it was probably going to cost me a small fortune. But I didn't care. This wasn't just about a paint job anymore. It was about freedom. It was about the right to express myself, to live in a house that reflected my personality, to make a statement. And what bigger statement could there be than turning your suburban home into a miniature White House? My first step was finding a contractor who was both skilled enough and crazy enough to take on this project. I found him in the form of a man named Bob, a recurring name in my HOA battles, it seemed, who ran a local construction company specializing in unique and challenging renovations. "So let me get this straight," Bob said, looking over my somewhat hastily drawn sketches of the proposed White House replica. "You want to transform your house into the White House? Because your HOA doesn't like your paint job?" "Exactly," I said, nodding enthusiastically. "Think presidential, think historical, think the most epic HOA defiance in the history of suburban America." Bob stared at me for a moment. Then a slow grin spread across his face. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Dead serious," I said. "I have a situation with my HOA president, and this is my response." I briefly recounted the saga of the paint job, the fine Brenda Beige's obsession with uniformity, and my burning desire for a little bit of architectural revenge. "Mr. Miller," Bob said, shaking his head and chuckling, "you are one patriotic individual? I'm in. This is going to be the most interesting project I've ever worked on. Plus, I've always wanted to build a replica of the White House." He paused. "But are you sure about this? It's a bit much." "Much is exactly what I'm going for," I said. "I want it to be unforgettable. I want it to be unmistakable. I want it to be the most glorious, ridiculous, HOA-defying White House replica the world has ever seen. And I have to say, I can afford this." And so, construction began. The first step was, of course, obtaining the necessary building permits. This proved to be surprisingly easy. The city officials, after recovering from their initial shock, seemed to find the whole project rather amusing, and, as long as my plans met all the structural and safety codes, which, thanks to Bob's expertise, they did, there was nothing they could do to stop me. Then came the demolition, or rather, the transformation. We didn't tear down my existing house, we built upon it. We added columns to the front porch, creating a miniature version of the White House's iconic portico. We constructed a slightly smaller replica of the famous facade, complete with faux, stone detailing and perfectly proportioned windows. We even added a non-functional balcony overlooking my front yard, perfect for addressing the nation, or at least the neighborhood. The construction process was, as expected, a spectacle. Trucks arrived, carrying tons of building materials, lumber, concrete, faux stone, and, of course, gallons upon gallons of white paint. Workers swarmed over my property, hammering, sawing, and generally transforming my ordinary suburban home into something extraordinary. Something presidential. Something utterly, completely ridiculous. The neighbors, as expected, were fascinated. They gathered on their sidewalks, watching the construction with a mixture of stunned silence, open-mouthed gawking, secret admiration, and the inevitable question, is he serious? I, of course, played the part of the eccentric homeowner perfectly. I'd stroll around my yard, wearing a replica presidential seal pin on my lapel and offering vague yet enthusiastic explanations. "It's a historical renovation," I'd say, with a perfectly straight face. "A tribute to American architecture. A statement." My internal monologue was a constant stream of triumphant pronouncements and giddy anticipation. "Take that, Brenda Beige," I'd mutter to myself as another column was erected. "Enjoy your harmonious aesthetic now. I imagined her face, contorted with rage, her perfectly beige world crumbling around her. It was a beautiful thought. There was, of course, a brief visit from an HOA representative. Not Brenda, thankfully. She was probably still recovering from the shock of seeing the construction trucks arrive. "Mr. Miller," he said, looking nervously at the rapidly transforming house, his voice a mixture of confusion and apprehension. "We've received some concerns about this project." "Concerns?" I repeated, feigning innocence. "What kind of concerns?" "Well," he said, stammering slightly, "it's rather unconventional and large." "It's a renovation," I corrected, with a perfectly straight face. "And, as you can see," I added, pulling out a copy of my building permits and the relevant HOA bylaws, both of which I now carried with me at all times, "it's perfectly compliant. All permits approved. All regulations followed. No paint job violations here. Just architectural enhancements." He looked at the documents, then at the house, then back at me. He clearly had no idea what to do. He mumbled something about reviewing the situation and retreated, looking utterly defeated. I, Arthur Miller, had once again outmaneuvered the HOA, and my little White House, my monument to artistic freedom and HOA defiance, was nearing completion. The anticipation was almost unbearable. The neighborhood was buzzing, and I, for one, couldn't wait to see the final result. And even more importantly, I couldn't wait to see Brenda's reaction. The completion of the Little White House, as I'd christened my architectural masterpiece, was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. It stood there, on my suburban lot in Harmony Heights, a scaled-down yet surprisingly accurate replica of the most famous residence in America. The white columns gleamed in the sun, the porticos projected an air of miniature grandeur, and the overall effect was breathtaking. It was absurd. It was everything I'd hoped for. And, of course, Brenda Beige arrived within minutes. She didn't even bother with the pretense of knocking. She just stormed onto my property, which technically was now a historical landmark, in my own mind at least. Her face a mask of apoplectic rage, her perfectly beige outfit practically vibrating with indignation. "What?" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the previously quiet neighborhood. "Have you done?" I emerged from behind my newly installed miniature flagpole, a picture of calm serenity, wearing a replica presidential seal pin on my lapel and holding a slightly smaller American flag. "Good afternoon, Brenda," I said, my voice smooth and even. "You're admiring my historical renovation, I presume?" "Historical renovation?" she sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at the miniature White House. This is UN American. You've turned your house into a mockery." "It's the Little White House, Brenda," I corrected with a perfectly straight face. "A tribute to American architecture. A celebration of history. And, as you can see, it's perfectly compliant with the HOA bylaws. Remember, there are no rules against architectural style, only against unapproved paint colors, which, I might add, I no longer have." But, it's the White House," she stammered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "In Harmony Heights. It's completely out of place." "It's unique, Brenda," I countered with a shrug. "It's distinctive. It's adding architectural diversity to the neighborhood. In fact," I added with a mischievous grin, "I'd argue it's enhancing property values. Who wouldn't want to live next door to a miniature White House?" I then proceeded to give her a tour, pointing out the various architectural details, the columns, the porticos, the faux balustrades, the perfectly proportioned windows. I even showed her my miniature rose garden, a small patch of rose bushes I'd planted, and my, tongue-in-cheek, oval office, my repurposed garage, now furnished with a desk, a leather chair, and a fake presidential seal rug. Brenda's reaction was predictable. She sputtered, she stammered, she shook her fist, she threatened. But mostly she just looked utterly defeated. The sheer scale of the project, the blatant yet technically legal defiance of my actions, had broken her. This will not stand, she finally managed to choke out, her voice hoarse. I'll have this abomination removed. You'll see? She turned and stomped off, her perfectly beige shoes leaving, ironically, colorful imprints on my, now historically significant, lawn. The emergency HOA meeting, Part 2, the presidential proclamation, was, if possible, even more chaotic than the previous ones. Brenda, looking like she'd aged another 20 years in the past few weeks, presented her case with the fervor of a deranged dictator. This little White House, she declared, her voice shaking with emotion, is an affront to everything Harmony Heights stands for. It's a safety hazard. It's an eyesore. It's making a mockery of American history. She'd even brought in a so-called architectural historian, a guy who looked suspiciously like her nephew wearing a tweed jacket and a bow tie that was clearly too tight, who testified about the inappropriateness of replicating historical buildings in a suburban setting and the negative impact of such projects on community cohesion. Then it was my turn. They, of course, were trying to change the rules, so they would have to remove the little White House. Miss Beige, I began, addressing the board with a calm, reasonable demeanor that was, of course, completely fake, seems to be under the impression that I've somehow violated the HOA bylaws. I assure you, I have not. I presented my defense meticulously and methodically. I cited the previous bylaws, the ones in effect when I'd started my project, highlighting the fact that there were no restrictions on architectural style. I argued that my renovation was a legitimate architectural project, that it complied with all building codes and safety regulations, and that it was, in fact, a rather impressive, if somewhat unconventional, addition to the neighborhood. I even brought in a real architect, a friend of mine, thankfully, to testify about the historical accuracy and architectural merit of my replica. He explained the challenges of scaling down such a complex building, the attention to detail that had gone into the project, and the overall, surprisingly positive, impact it had on the surrounding landscape. The other board members were, to put it mildly, divided. Some were clearly still loyal to Brenda, but their support was rapidly disintegrating. Others looked confused, overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of the situation. And a few, I suspected, were secretly wanting to take a tour of my little White House. Then, a woman from the back of the room stood up. She was a local history teacher, a resident of Harmony Heights I'd met during the construction. "I have to disagree with Miss Beige," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I think Mr. Miller's little White House is fascinating. It's a unique and creative project that's actually quite historically accurate in its own way. It's providing a valuable educational opportunity for the community, and frankly," she added with a smile, "it's a lot more interesting than another beige box." That was the final blow. The board, facing a potential lawsuit, a public relations nightmare, and the undeniable evidence of my project's relative historical accuracy and architectural merit, voted to do nothing. The meeting ended in chaos, with Brenda screaming about the decline of Western civilization and the rise of architectural anarchy, and me, Arthur Miller, the accidental presidential impersonator, walking out with a smug but well-deserved, I thought, smile on my face. But Brenda, like a particularly persistent and beige-obsessed cockroach, wasn't about to give up. What followed was a period of escalating absurdity that I can only describe as the White House Wars. Brenda, obsessed with getting rid of my little White House, or at the very least making my life miserable, tried every tactic she could think of. She filed complaints with the city, claiming it was a zoning violation, a safety hazard, and a public nuisance. The city inspectors came, they inspected, and they found nothing. My replica was perfectly legal. She tried to organize a neighborhood petition to have it removed. She went door to door, armed with her clipboard and her "think of the property values" speech, trying to convince people that my little White House was a threat to their peaceful beige existence. The petition failed miserably. Most people either politely declined to sign or slammed the door in her face. Some even offered to volunteer as tour guides for my increasingly popular historical landmark. She even, I suspect, attempted some minor acts of vandalism. I found a few, easily removed, "Keep Harmony Heights Harmonious" signs stuck in the ground near my miniature rose garden. And one night, I woke up to find the little White House mysteriously covered in toilet paper. Apparently, she was hoping to, I don't know, make it look like a giant roll of toilet paper? Her logic was, as always, questionable. I had cameras set up and caught her in the act, and I, of course, responded in kind. Not with vandalism, oh no. I was above that. I responded with enhancements and events. I added a miniature flagpole to my front yard, complete with a slightly smaller American flag, which I raised and lowered with mock ceremony every day. I hosted press conferences for the neighborhood kids on my front lawn, answering their surprisingly insightful questions about American history and architecture. I organized state dinners, potlucks, in my rose garden, inviting the neighbors, except Brenda, naturally, to share food and fellowship under the miniature shadow of the White House. I created a presidential library, a bookshelf in my living room, filled with books about American history, architecture, and, of course, the White House. I even gave my house a Secret Service code name, Mockingbird. And, because why not, I started charging a small fee for tours of my little White House, donating the proceeds to a local historical society. The little White House had become a neighborhood sensation. People would drive by just to take pictures. Tourists, yes, tourists, would stop and ask for directions. The local news even did a story about the ongoing feud between a homeowner and his HOA, and the miniature White House that's taking Harmony Heights by storm. It was a glorious, ridiculous, utterly over-the-top spectacle. And with each passing day, with each new addition, with each new event, I could feel Brenda's frustration growing, her power waning, her sanity slipping. The little White House had become more than just a replica. It was a symbol of resistance, a testament to the power of creative and slightly unhinged rebellion. And I, Arthur Miller, the accidental architectural revolutionary, was winning.